Design shapes the way you live. I'm Nico, an interior design expert focused on the connection between home and well-being. Using science, design, and professional expertise, I'll help you shape a space that elevates your mindset and enhances your well-being. Let's create space for better living, starting now. Welcome to Your Home by Design, the podcast about using interior design to support your well-being and the way you want to live. I'm Nico, and today we're diving into one of the most powerful and often misunderstood tools in professional design, layering. Layering is what gives a room its soul. It's where materials, textures, and details come together to create depth, character, and warmth. This isn't about overfilling a space. It's about creating a home that reflects who you are and supports how you live. If you've ever looked at a beautifully designed space and wondered how it can include so much and still feel calm, cohesive, and welcoming, today's episode will get you thinking differently about how layers work. Let's get into it. So what is layering? Well, layering is everything in interior design. When we look at how to pull a space together, every little decision that's made is done through the act of layering and asking the right questions and making sure that every little thing that's in there makes sense together as a whole. Layering is really what makes a room feel lived in as well. It's inviting and complete. And I think the word complete is a really important one when we look at layering properly. When layering is complete, it makes the room feel finished. It makes it feel pulled together. It's not piling up on stuff. It's about mixing and selecting textures, materials, and details in a way that adds depth, personality, interest, style, warmth. It's the difference between a room that looks really overly styled and almost perfect and a room that feels like it all makes sense, that it feels even lived in. It feels like a home. So when we look at what the elements of layering is, it's really everything that you can add in done in a very strategic way. So the elements that you use, the various elements within a space that creates richness, that creates excitement, interest, visual weight, and just a connection, right? Everything is somewhat connected in a way, whether it's connected through pattern, whether it's connected through materiality, whether it's connected through color, lighting, everything has a purpose and it's all selected for a reason. It's selected with the idea of how are these going to play off of one another. So that's always at the forefront of your mind when you're adding in layers. So layering is really everything. It's the interplay of everything from lighting, textiles, art, finishes, flooring, basically everything in a room. When you stand in a room and you look wherever your eyes land as you move through a space is the potential to layer or something that has been layered, whether that was done on purpose or not. Everywhere you look is acting as a layer to the space. So it's really what makes a space often feel lived in and not staged. Because when you picture a showroom, for instance, like a furniture showroom, they're beautiful. You know, they've often, let's use IKEA as an example. When you walk into IKEA, what do you see, right? You see living rooms that are set up. And although a lot of people will look at that and say, oh my gosh, I'd love to recreate that, it does feel very showroomy. So if you were to take that living room and plop it into yours, chances are you're not going to feel the same, right? You're in the context of shopping, you're looking, you're getting excited. And what you're seeing is a showroom. Everything has been selected. It's brand new. It's pulled together in a certain way. And yes, there's been layering done, obviously. It looks very pleasing and intentional, but it looks like a showroom. It almost looks too perfect. And that's the case for any showroom, any furniture showroom that you go in, any design showroom, is it's very perfect. There isn't that story. There isn't the people that live in it. There isn't the selection of things that are pulled together for a reason other than they just look good, right? So when we're talking about layering, so much of it is how can we add details and interest so that it gives more complexity to a space, not just it's brand new and it looks nice, but there's something more to it. You want your space to look lived in, for example, you can actually purposely select the type of fabrics that look a little bit worn, that have a little bit of a nubbly texture to them. So everything that you bring in has the opportunity to be layered in the way that you need it to and in the goals that you have for the space. And with layering, there can be almost two extremes. So I remember years ago working with some clients who were downsizing. So they were living in this fairly large home and they were downsizing to a home that was like a third of the size. And they were collectors. They loved buying antiques and art and all of these things, but they weren't just collectors. They also had inherited a bunch of family heirlooms. So their home, their large home, was well appointed. Everything had its own place. So it wasn't like their rooms were overly crammed with stuff. It was just they had a lot more square footage. So they were able to showcase all of their collections and their heirlooms. And then of course when they were moving and knowing that they were going down to a third of the size, what ended up happening was we had to really do an edit of the items. We had to rank things in order of importance. So what was the story behind that? What sort of visual characteristics did it have? So you're balancing and you're doing cataloging of everything that's in their home and the key pieces and the key elements that need to come into the new place. Will they work? Is there a place for them? What are the size? What's the story behind it? What's the significance? Knowing the aesthetic of the new place was going to be completely different than the aesthetic of their old place. So factoring all of those design details in as you're selecting things and working through that cataloging process with them. So that was one extreme. You're really dwindling it down to the level of importance. Then on the other extreme, I remember a client that didn't have anything. She had sold a family home and she didn't want to bring anything that she had from the home to her new space because it was in her mind, the things didn't have the value that she needed in order to want to bring them there. So whether it was just the fact that they were kind of old and dated and they didn't carry a lot of value in the sense of being like antiques or that kind of stuff, they also didn't carry the value of a story. So she wasn't personally connected to anything. And she was kind of just ready. Like she was excited and ready to start fresh. We had gutted the new home down to the studs and everything was going in new and bright and all of that. She was really excited about that. So she wanted to start fresh. But the challenge was how do we layer things in that don't feel like that showroom? Because that's when, you walk into a home and it just feels a little bit stark. It feels like it lacks personality. We had to really work through where can we find stories? Where can we bring in colors that aren't just because you like them? Colors because we pulled it from a piece of art that she loved. We literally had nothing to go off of. There was no art. I remember she was actually gifted a piece of art. And I thought, this is perfect. It was a good friend of hers, gave her this piece of art. Her friend thought that she would love it. And I saw the art and I thought, okay, well, if she loves it, this is a perfect place to start pulling colors and textures and creating a story from this. But she hated it. She really just did not connect with this piece of art. And therefore we were like, okay, so back to square one. Where can we begin to tell a story? What story is this space, this new home of yours, going to tell? It's an exciting time in your life. It's an exciting stage to be in. She was like beyond excited about her new home, but how can we make it feel as amazing as this stage of her life? And yeah, so that was the two kind of extremes. You can have too much stuff and need to really pare down, or you can have not enough and have to find ways to add things into your space that have meaning and intention and that are really going to create a beautiful story. One of the most important things I've learned, both through research and practice, is that connection to a space really matters. And that connection isn't just built by surrounding ourselves with things that hold sentimental value, like a family heirloom or a gift that someone gave you. That's one part of it. But a deeper sense of connection can actually come from something else. And that's the experience of having made choices, right? Of having shaped your environment with intention. When you've had a hand in the outcome, when you've decided how something should feel or function, your brain registers that as belonging. You feel more grounded, more at ease. It's your space because you've made it that way. You've been able to carve it out and had some level of control over that outcome. And this is why layering isn't just a visual design technique. Yes, it's a very important step in interior design, but it's a process of decision making, of storytelling with a purpose. Each object, each texture, each material, each and every piece you bring in says something. It's saying something. And ideally, it's all working toward the same goal, the way you want to live, right? Because when you walk into a room that has been layered effectively, it feels like a sense of completion. There isn't really anything that needs to happen. And you really get a sense of how a person lives in that room, lives in that house, their lifestyle, their likes, everything from their color preference can be seen and felt. A layered space should reflect not just your taste, but really your intentions, how you want to live. Maybe it's a room for hosting or for resting, for reconnecting with family or just a sense of creativity, the way you want to use that room. Layering is how we really align the look of the room with the life that you want to happen inside of that room. So what's often overlooked is how satisfying, how powerful it is to feel like a space is complete. That feeling of standing in your living room and knowing you're not constantly tweaking or chasing some version of perfection. Instead, you've reached a point where every piece, every choice supports your vision, your personal vision that you've defined and you've worked towards. That's not the end of creativity. That's the reward. And it's available to anyone who's willing to engage with their space a little more deeply, going beyond just how it looks, the act of completing it. So as you think about layering, because I'm going to be getting into some tips and some things that you can do. So as you're thinking about it, whether it's just swapping out throw pillows or adding some natural texture or just rearranging objects or thinking about a new floor plan for a space, don't just think of it as extra, right? Don't think of layering as this extra little thing that you have to do. Think of it as the final expression of your voice in the room. What you're saying, this is how I want to live, and this is how I've made it happen. So everything that comes together is essentially the story that you're trying to tell. And that is a beautiful thing because you don't just have a story, you've carved out a beautiful space for yourself. And every decision that you've made isn't just because you want it to look amazing. It's because you want to make your space personalized for yourself because you know that the benefits of living in a space that's not only complete, but a space that you've carved out, you've had the liberty of making decisions, of visually changing how you interact with the space, how the space makes you feel. When you come home from a hard day of work, walking into that room where you've set that space to be what you need it to be, those are the kind of things that when you layer in everything you need to layer in a room, when you think of it in that way, that's the impact. That's where you gain the benefits of using your home as a tool. So now I want to get into what you can layer. So how can you use layering to your advantage? What are the areas that you can really hone in on and focus on? So what you can do and how to do it. And I'm just going to run through these. I just want to share some quick tips and some ways that you can do it. So the first one is textiles. Textiles, of course, when you look at any space that's been designed well, where layering has happened in a wonderful, beautiful way, you're going to see textiles. So textiles are things like your fabric schemes, textiles with throws and cushions, curtains, everything like that. So when we look at a fabric scheme, anything that so now I want to talk about what to layer and how, because I know if you've lived in a room for a while and it looks a certain way and you want to change things and you want to improve the space, often it's like, well, how can I do that? What are the areas that you want to focus on? And this can be really whether you're planning on doing a total overhaul or whether you're just doing a few minor things. So now I want to talk about what you can do to add that layering in. So what to layer and how to do it. And I'm going to share just a few things here with you, but some of the things are the ones that will have the biggest impact. And I want to start by just saying that if you look at a room, let's say you're looking on Pinterest or you're looking in a magazine and you see this space and you're like, oh my gosh, this just looks amazing. And you start to pick it apart and ask, what is it? Oh, well, they've used this rug and I can see that they've used this pattern on the rug and then they've used this pattern on the toss cushions. And I can see that there's sort of this undertone happening. Maybe the wall color picks up on a color in the fabric. And I can see that, oh, that piece of art, yes, that art has a bit of that color as well. And oh, look at the lighting. This is beautiful lighting. And oh, then they've got another piece of art on the other side of the room. And then the drapery. Oh, they've got two fabrics happening on the drapery, and you start to pick up on this. And then you're like, okay, well, this space looks amazing. Now, where the heck would I start if I wanted my space to look like this? And I want to just give you some quick tips on that because it can feel overwhelming when you're looking at rooms that are complete, right? You haven't seen the process. You haven't seen where they started and how they got to where they got, right? You're seeing the end goal and that can feel overwhelming. So I always suggest, you may have heard me say this before, but once you've gathered inspiration, at that point, it's really, really important to stop. Stop searching, stop gathering, stop the influences, because that keeps coming and that's where it can throw you off. What's really important is to gather the information, get inspired, and then pause on that. And then you're able to really focus and hone in on what you need, what you want from your space, from lifestyle to personal goals, how you need to feel, how you want the space to, if you need it to help you unwind. Every decision that you make has to speak to that, right? So it allows you to really take a pause from the external influences and hone in on your room and what you need and the story you want to create. And once you've done that, you've got to look at where's your jumping off point, because every design starts with something that's going to inform the choices. So a lot of times I've heard people say, well, I'm choosing this paint color, and they start with a paint color. And I always caution people to start with the least of the options first. So I never start with paint, because if I were to start with paint, I have hundreds, as you do as well, hundreds of color options. You can walk into one paint store and let's say you're going with a taupe, and you walk in and there's I don't know, let's just say 40 different taupe options in front of you. And that's in one paint supplier. So then you go to another one and there's also a ton of taupe options. And then you go to another one. So you add those all up together. And I'm not kidding. There's times where you will literally have hundreds of taupe options. I have about 5 different fan decks from different paint suppliers. And I have my favorites. If I'm looking for a certain tone, I know that this paint company typically will have this favorite tone. If I'm looking for another one, I may have to look to another one. But overall, there's hundreds of paint colors to choose from. So you never want to start with something that you have so many options. So what's the least? Well, that depends on your budget. It depends on where you're shopping. So let's say you're purchasing a rug and you only have 2 stores to go to. Those are your options. You're going to go local and you've got 2 stores that carry rugs. Well, you walk into the first one and chances are you might maybe see 1 rug there that you like. And then you go to the other one, maybe you see 2. So your options are you have 3 rugs to choose from. So you know that whichever rug you end up getting, because there's hundreds of paint colors, you will be able to find a paint color that coordinates with the rug. Whereas if you had chose the paint color first, with hundreds of options, you choose one, and now you've got that paint color and you're trying to go to the store to match or coordinate with it. You've got 3 options for a rug. Chances are those undertones are not going to work. The colors aren't going to be right. It's just not going to work. Whereas if you do it the other way around, it will be much more successful. And the same goes for textiles. So really, the least of the options needs to be decided first. Okay. And if you've got a patterned rug and it's colorful, you're going to take that rug as your jumping off point and work outwards from there. So that rug can inform the shapes in the room. That rug can inform some of the textures in the room. It can inform the different tones and colors that you're going to pull into the space, the patterns on your toss cushions, and of course, it's very important when you're pulling together a toss cushion scheme or drapery scheme and your rug to look at the size of the pattern and the variety of patterns that you're introducing, because you play with scale. So you don't want 2 patterns that are the same scale because they compete. And so you want to really add that variety and that interest in scale. So that's an important thing. And, how many colors are you introducing into the space? Look to your art, right? Again, I used a rug as an example as your jumping off point, but it could be your art. Art is an amazing thing to start with because, again, back to the least amount of options, you might not love a ton of art, right? Or you may have a piece of art that you love that you can use as the jumping off point, and that informs all the other choices. But in terms of color, like when you're thinking about a color scheme for your room, and if making a color scheme is nerve-wracking for you because it is a challenging thing, think about using a singular color scheme. So where you hone in on one color, right? And then you take that color and you use a lighter version of it and a darker version of it. So you're changing the intensity of that color. So every color has a range, right? It's got several lighter options depending on, let's pretend that it falls into sort of the mid-tone range. And so the range before is very light and the range after it is dark. So it's working progressively darker and progressively lighter on either side. And what you want to do is you want to utilize that. So you chose one color, but you're going to use the different intensities of that color. And that's really kind of like a safe thing to do in a lot of cases because it helps you stay on track And it gives you that sense of parameters. You know you're not going to veer off. You know you're not going to be starting to question, oh, well, is this color? Should I now be bringing that color in? And when you're shopping and you see things, you're like, oh, but that could work. Oh, wait, could it work? Maybe I don't really know. It's less confusing in some regards, but also one color can be at times harder to find. So if you're shopping and you have less options of places to shop, then going with one color might be challenging. But again, patience is the name of the game. So I always encourage people, this doesn't happen overnight unless you have access to a lot of vendors, a lot of suppliers, a lot of shops. Then the process can be accelerated, but that depends on where you're shopping. So even if you're shopping online, I always say get a sample, right? So if you're buying fabrics online, if you're buying a rug online, always just be patient and just get the sample, because if you can shop and layer things in, having a sample to work with is crucial. That's something that interior designers, we always have samples. We always are playing with the scheme. So using those samples, you've got multiple samples in front of you and you're moving things around. You're seeing how the colors are working together. You're seeing how the textures and the patterns and everything else come together. So having a sample is really important. Something that I love is when you get to the point where you can see undertones. And this is something if you're working in color a lot, you have what I call color memory. It's almost like you see an undertone and you can remember that undertone. And then when you're out there shopping, you know exactly what undertone you're looking for. And you can see something, from memory, whether that is the right tone and the right color for the space. But that's when you're working with color a lot. I mean, you have times where I'm not working with color a lot. I'm not pulling paint colors. I'm not building a fabric scheme. A lot of designers, they'll be working on a certain project where they're just doing hard surfaces. So they're working in a kitchen, they're working in a bathroom. So there's flooring, there's tile, there's, just a lot more hard surfaces. And so, yes, they're working with color in the sense of the stone colors and the tile colors, and they're building schemes in that way. But maybe they haven't been working in textiles for a while. They haven't been pulling together textile schemes. And so they're just not so in it. And therefore that moment where they do have to go out and they're pulling samples and doing all those things, they have to have their samples with them. It's just so very important to have samples. That is the professionals. We carry samples, we bring them with us. And it is so important for somebody who doesn't feel that sense of confidence going into stores and knowing without a doubt the scheme and what they're looking for. I mean, let's face it, it's a hard thing, right? It's a very hard thing when you know what you like and you've got this idea in your head and these inspiration images. And yes, you're starting to build this scheme and you're starting to develop your story and the way you want your space to feel and how you want to thrive in that room. And then you have to start shopping. And the reality is you always have to come back to the jumping off point. You always have to come back to that. Come back to the story, come back to the intention, come back to what your goals are. Every single decision that you make, because that ultimately is when you're done, how the room really feels like it was layered with intention. And good design is really about intentional design. It's about every little thing that was chosen for a reason. Now, the reason is really important. Of course, for me, that reason comes down to how does it affect our bodies? How does it affect our brain? And ultimately our life as we live and use and interact with our aesthetic environment. Okay, wow. So I went on a little tangent there. I am going to talk about what else to layer and how. But yeah, I just am so passionate about this that it's hard to hit those points fast. But the next thing that I would say after kind of building out a scheme with textiles and looking at your colors, is things like materials, right? So when you're layering things in, what materials? Now, not materials as in fabric, but materials as in, the woods that you're bringing in. So the different tones and textures of woods. Are you layering those in a way? Do they complement each other? Do they speak to one another? Things like ceramics, the materials, the tactility of a space, right? How are you bringing those other elements in, those other materials in? So things like ceramics and marble and wool, or, even glass. Those are the types of things that you want to start layering in and have them sing to one another, have them speak to one another. So for instance, if you want a lived in aesthetic, that your ceramics that you bring in, well, they're probably going to be honed. So they're not going to have a lot of shine to them. They might have texture. They might look like they're 100 years old. Even if they're not, maybe you go to an antique store and you find this amazing something that you can bring home that looks really, really old and it's authentic. Or you just happen to find a beautifully aged looking bowl that you can sit on your coffee table from a store, and it's brand new and it doesn't have authentic age, but it does have aesthetic age. And you're bringing in those materials, and those materials tell a story, right? So that's going to provide that lived in look that you want. Another thing is shapes. Shapes are crucial when we're talking about how to carve out a home, carve out your spaces to really influence how you feel in them. Curves are more pleasing to the eye. We relax. Our bodies kind of get to feel really good in curves. They help calm us, whereas angular things don't as much. But I did read a paper that it said the longer you spend around angles, the complexity of the shape is good for us. So it depends on how you want to use the space. That comes down to what sort of level of mental alertness do you want in the room. If you want the room to be a room you relax and unwind in, then having those curves and creating that really welcoming space would be very important. Whereas if you want a room to feel a little more stimulating, maybe you're going to study or you're going to work, or you might even read, but your choice of what you're reading is something of learning material, then maybe you want to introduce some angles into the room to give that sense of complexity and to keep you alert. So, and another thing that's important to factor in when we're talking about layering is heights. Layering in heights and scale is what brings rhythm and movement into a room. So it keeps the eye really engaged and the space feels really dynamic and interesting. So when everything sits at the same level or is the same size, a room can feel like it just falls flat. But when you start mixing low elements like baskets or floor cushions or that low coffee table with mid-height pieces like side chairs and what you just, what you accessorize your coffee table with, and then incorporating taller items like lamps or oversized art, plants, and creating that visual flow that feels really natural, but it feels very balanced because you're playing with heights and scale. Each layer that you put in there adds that depth and it adds some contrast, and it really helps the room feel grounded and alive, because when it feels grounded, you've been playing with things, the scale of things and the heights of things really helps a space have that sense of purpose and intentionality. So if you just take a moment and if you're at home listening to this and you look around your room, or if you're not at home, when you get home, take a moment and just look around your room. Can you see repeating elements? Can you see that there's been intention in the choices? And do you feel that layering has been done in a way that the room feels complete? I have a favorite quote, and you've probably heard this before. It's by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that, but the quote is, "Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away." And I think when you look at your space and you're saying, is it complete? Is it done? Well, have you reinforced the color enough? Have you brought in enough texture? When you look at your room, do you feel the story? Do you feel the connection to what you've selected to be in that space? Do you feel like there's been a layer over layer of things that all make sense and they're all cohesive? I think it's okay to say, well, you know what? Maybe it's not picture perfect, because that's okay. We don't want it to be picture perfect. It's your home, it's your story, and it can be lived in. It can be imperfect. But can you take stuff away? Look at your space and say, can I remove that? Can I remove that? Can I remove that? And if the answer is no, when you can't take anything else away, you might have reached the point of completion. And that's so, so important. Layering is where the magic happens, not because your living room is full, but because it's full of life. It's where your story lives, and it's how your space speaks to you. If you're craving a deeper connection with your home, start here. Start with layering and don't overthink it. Add one thoughtful layer at a time and see how the space shifts. Thanks for tuning in to Your Home by Design. If you found this episode helpful, I'd love it if you shared it or left a review. It helps more home lovers like you find their way here. And if you're curious to explore more, my living room guide goes deeper into these ideas. Until next time, keep creating space for the life you want to live. Thanks so much for listening today. If you found this episode helpful, the best way to support the show is to follow along and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can become one of our Better Living backers. It's a small monthly contribution that helps keep the show going. And as a thank you, I'll send you a personal note along with a 15% discount for the Create Space course when it launches. You can find the support the show link right in the show notes. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for creating space with me.